Hello, good evening. I went live before I finished my sip. I apologize. Today is October 25th. We are very close to the election at this point in time. And I have been told sometimes this week that I have not shared enough about my background. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. And as folks are coming in, if you haven't been to one of these before, please put your questions in the chat. Questions, comments, concerns. This is very much a town hall. I usually start out talking about a topic. This week, it's my background. And then I keep an eye out for your comments, questions, or concerns. I answer those or address them as I can either weave them in, or sometimes they're important enough, I'll just stop what I'm talking about and switch to that. I already know about me, so at any point in time, I'm happy to not talk about me. I have heard that you all don't understand enough about my background, so I thought I would take a little bit of time and sort of bring you to how I got here. I was born in the other Portland. My family actually went out and covered wagons. I was very ambitious of them. So my family, after I was born, I lived in Oregon for a little while. My mom's family is multi-generational Oregon. My dad's family was multi-generational Washington. We lived in Hawaii for a few years, and then we moved not to Seattle area. And I grew up there. My dad was a general contractor. He passed away when I was 10. I know that people have heard it in other clips. He was a vet. He had some mental health issues. So he was in the Navy. He had some mental health issues. They were not well treated. He tried to self-medicate a lot. It was really unfortunate as a living situation as a child. He did kill himself when I was 10, which left me a lot of time after school. So as I got older, I started to get more involved in stuff. I became a rainbow girl. I was a Demon Life sweetheart. I was not as fond of going to class as I should have been in high school. So I found lots of groups and activities. If you see it wiggling a little bit, I have a dog that's trying to crawl into my lap. He has discovered that if he sees me here, I'm stuck and he can come crawl up on me. It's very cute and loving, but a little bit much sometimes. So I was involved in a lot of clubs and activities. I was yearbook photography, worked in the darkroom there. I was on competitive dance team. I was in environmental club. I was the activities coordinator. I took some drama classes. I was definitely not the one who did the best in the drama classes. I went to school with somebody who did fairly well in Hollywood, who did much better in drama than I was. I was not that great in drama. Turns out I appreciate other people's drama more than my own, which is probably how I ended up as a family law attorney. And then by the time I was out of high school, I started working when I was 11 years old with a newspaper route, plus babysitting. Plus I used to do my own roadside snack shop. We got a lot of our food after my father passed away from food banks. So if you wanted something different, you had to find a way to earn the money to do it. So it was pretty sad in retrospect, selling like rum cake that was probably much older than it should have been to be consumed on the side of the road, trying to get money to buy ice cream so that I could get a snack that I enjoyed. So I moved from that to babysitting. Then I worked as a hostess and waitress at a Chinese restaurant, which actually just closed this year. That makes me very sad. I was hoping to go back and get a meal, and I went back we took the kids back to visit their grandparents, and I missed it by like 3 days or something. It was crazy. So I worked at a Chinese restaurant. I started working at Kinko's. I didn't actually graduate from high school. I got really sick my senior year, so I don't have a high school diploma or a GED. While I was working at Kinko's, I transferred to a few different facilities. I got some promotions. I got pay raises. And while I was at Kinko's, I started getting involved in my community a lot more heavily. So I started getting involved in the Chamber of Commerce. I became a city official. So I became a parks commissioner. As a parks commissioner, that was a volunteer position, but I did, oh my gosh, so much in my community. So I helped with the 4th of July. I was part of the first group of folks that got a Spirit of Woodinville Award, which was for people who put a lot of energy into that town. I was the youngest city official they'd ever had. Not a huge landmark. It was a relatively new city. It was only slightly over a decade old as a city. And Woodinville, which I'm sure none of you are familiar with because it's on the other side of the country. It's a 6 square mile town that is, I mean, you can commute to Seattle from it, but not very sanely. There's a lot of agriculture and winery tourism. So there's got to be at least 80 wineries there now. The brewery, there's a very swank restaurant, and a bunch of other slightly less swank, but still wonderful to eat at restaurants. There's distilleries now. That's a fairly new development. It's a really neat town that actually has a lot in common with rural Maine. There's some light manufacturing. The company Precor that makes exercise equipment is there. They do have some industrial parks that have some light manufacturing, and they do a lot with agriculture and tourism. So very similar in a lot of ways to Maine's 2nd Congressional District. Oh, Mackey Designs is there too. They do sound equipment. And again, several other light industrial manufacturing plants. So yeah, it was very similar in a lot of ways to rural Maine. I really loved it. I ended up on the board of directors of the chamber. On top of being a parks commissioner, I sat on a salmon task force, which is something that I never, ever, ever thought would become a relevant experience again. But you never know how life loops around. So as I've been watching the lobsterman debacle, it's actually super relevant. A salmon task force was some of the streams going through the town either had salmon or had salmon at one point in time or could have salmon. And so we had to follow a lot of Environmental Protection Act rules. And so there was a task force with citizens, and there was a citizen and the city official. And they worked with city staff and planning to make sure that the development and the goals of the city didn't clash with that. And boy, I learned so much more about salmon and endangered species than I had ever had on my list to learn. And it was really informative. Applying that skill to today really tells me that pretty much all of the politicians that are trying to help the fishermen are really making that all about themselves and not proposing any solutions that will actually resolve the conflict. I went to an event on Sunday that was all about the lobstermen. And, every politician that spoke was clearly trying to capitalize on the plight of the fishermen, but didn't have any solutions. What really needs to be happening is we need to fund the scientists having more access to the boats so they can get the data. There's a gap. So the scientists have one data set and the fishermen have another data set, and there is clearly some data that is missing that could reconcile those two because they'd say different things. But it's going to require the fishermen letting scientists on the boat, which they're probably not going to be super thrilled about. It's also going to require funding, which doesn't currently exist for the scientists. And nobody in Congress is proposing that. They're proposing lawsuits. They're proposing, defunding an aquarium over on the West Coast. But nobody's proposing funding the actual solution because that takes real work. It takes real compromise. It takes finding space in a budget to make that happen. And it's a little like, it's not shocking to me that some of the people would be doing that. It's shocking to me that our entire congressional delegation seems to think that's a solution. I find that to be sort of heartbreaking. And one of the things I discovered, you'll find a lot of times if I can close out an event, I tend to be sort of one of the last ones to leave. I want to make sure everybody's questions are answered. I'm happy to help pick up and chat while that's happening. So I was, I stayed behind a little bit with some of the fishermen after most of the politicians had left. And, the sentiment from many of them was that, boy, they were tired of being capitalized off of. And boy, nobody seemed to have solutions. And it's true. I mean, defunding an aquarium on the West Coast sure will get you a lot of press time, but it's definitely not going to fix the lobster issue. So, and you can only blame the aquarium so much. Actually, one of the fishermen's wives was I thought very astute. And she was saying that, the aquarium, putting them on a watch list, they're only going off of the data that they have. So you can only blame them so much for being passionate and committed to their cause, which is true. Not that the fishermen aren't particularly fair, but I find, as somebody who is married and has been married for 17 years to a gentleman that used to gill net and is still a merchant marine, that there is a very distinct group of gentlemen and ladies, but generally gentlemen, that go into that field, and they are a little bit seeing other people's perspectives is not always their best skill set. And having people on their boats is not always their best skill set there. But the good thing and the bad thing are the same thing. I've felt for 17 years of marriage, plus the time before, that, I've been my husband's favorite person. So he's very stubborn in that too. So the thing that's the bad thing is also a good thing. So yeah, I had a ton of experience. So I always think it's funny because I don't hide it, but I don't talk about it a lot. Women sort of get penalized some for being braggy. I think it's funny when people are like, well, why don't you try local level office? And I'm like, oh my goodness, I did local level office for 8 years. I've been there. I've done that. Why don't you try X, Y, or Z? Well, I've done all those things too. So I haven't been an elected official before, but I was an appointed official. Okay, sweetie, honey. Oh my goodness. Give me just a second. I have a very excited dog. Buddy, can you take this dog and put him outside, please? Hey, give me just a sec. Little man, can you please put this dog outside? Hey, give me just a sec. Little man, can you please put this dog outside? Put the dog outside, please. Thank you. Sorry. I did throw a book at you. Can you please put the dog outside? One of my children, we've got them separated right now, is down here watching TV, but he's doing it with headphones on so that he's not disruptive. Please take this love monster and put him outside for a minute so I can finish this, please. Thank you so much. Okay, pup, go. Go outside. There we go. That was just so much love. Go outside. So much love. Go outside. Go outside and play. Oh, no, I guess we're compromising. We're sitting on our thing. So I will be adding stuff in just a second. Well, there is somebody who is very friendly with some comments that are probably not super appropriate. I'm going to see what we can do about that. Yeah, I have a lot of life experience that has really become much more relevant than I was expecting. I have done an awful lot of stuff that I would have never figured would be like the same in task force that would apply. I've also sat on some of the other experience that I haven't covered. I sat on, I've been a member of the American Bar Association for quite a few years. I've sat on some of their boards and committees. I've chaired some. So yeah, I have a lot of organizational experience. I have a lot of experience generally with a lot of these things. And I have, oh goodness, I have a lot of experience doing getting organizations. So we used to do a lot of public-private partnerships, getting the public-private partnerships to work together. So what a public-private partnership is when you have the city or state or some government agency that works together with private groups, and sometimes those groups are not for profit. So we worked on a skate park in Woodinville, and the Rotary came in and they did some work with that. We had some people who wanted naming rights for a park. They're private citizens. That was something where we helped make a project happen because we were able to get some extra funding that wasn't in the city budget. I'm not sure, honey. I'm doing this right now. So Dan asked, and let me loop back around to this. Dan asked, what's my view on LGBTQ codifying marriage equality into federal law? I think there's an awful lot of things that need to be codified into federal law, and some of them may rise to the level of a constitutional amendment. I think voting is one of those. I think the right to marry as you see fit is clearly something that we need to give folks a little bit more oomph on, and I think a statute might not be enough. I think we might actually need some constitutional amendments. It's been a long time since we had some, and it might be time to bring those back around. Certainly, I think that women should be people, and that has been made very clear lately that we are not. So yeah, I think that there's some things that we need to codify by statute, but I actually think there's probably some constitutional amendments that are lacking. It's been a while since we've done document maintenance. And our Constitution is designed to be both sort of a hallowed document, but also a living, breathing document that changes as our society does. I think not at a minimum making it a federal law and codifying that in law is problematic. Because if you don't have it there, you are creating stress for people unnecessarily. So I don't think that you need to go out of your way to create laws most of the time. But I do think it is part of the job of the government, and it is incumbent on the government to say, we also need to not cause people stress. We need to not go out of our way. So my process is you start by saying, hey, does this need to be a law? And if it does, then the answer is figure out what level it goes to. And then those laws should be doing one of a few things. They should be spending our shared resources with wise and judicious decision making, not being frivolous, not being wasteful. There's always going to be a little bit of waste. There's always going to be a little bit of stuff that doesn't quite go what it's supposed to, especially with the size of budget that our federal government has. It's very large, but it should be a small percentage. They also are there to help solve problems that are too big for us to solve on our own. So military, climate change, those sort of issues, making sure there's a safety net that's too big for us to solve on our own. And then the third real thing that they do is protect our basic human rights. And a government should not be going out of its way to be stressful for its citizens, and should not give uncertainty if there is a path that is clear and reasonable to give certainty. Wondering what your rights are going to be is really traumatic to people, and needlessly so. Our rights shouldn't be something that's in question. So to me, that doesn't matter whether we're talking about LGBTQ rights. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about women's rights. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about the right to vote, which should be a right. If we are not protecting people, we are causing stress. That doesn't mean that you need to protect people on everything, but fundamental rights, you definitely should be protecting on those. That was the only question I've gotten so far. We have had a few people come in. I did get some very interesting name calling that we're going to pop, or that I went ahead and took care of. I think this is the very first one of these. I've had somebody use stepped on Lego language in, so that's festive and interesting. I haven't seen any other questions pop in, so I'll just talk a little bit longer about my background for anybody who's interested. Folks do watch these later. So I did some stuff with the American Bar Association. I did a little bit with Admiralty law, which I found interesting. And my husband's a merchant marine. I did some work with litigation, torts. I did some work with family law, and now I'm a family law attorney. That's pretty much exclusively what I do, besides a little bit of mediation. I am also on the state's roster for foreclosure diversion. On top of some of my other things, I've also had some, I don't know if I'd call it work or extracurricular. I've had a real estate license in 3 different states because my dad was really into construction. I grew up with that when I was little. My mom was also an appraiser she was an assessor for the appraiser's office. That is what she retired doing. So she was into real estate, and she'd had a real estate license too. And I have a remodeling habit, so I like to remodel homes. I've done a little bit all over the place. It's been very interesting. So I find that whenever people bring up a topic, I usually have a little bit of knowledge on that topic, not on everything. I'm sort of a Jill of all trades. So, whether it's remodeling or cooking or salmon task force, or I've done a lot of traveling that I don't talk about much. A lot of rural Maine has not had the opportunity to travel. And it doesn't, to me, it seems a little needlessly braggy to say that, I had children a little later in life and that let me travel some in my 20s, because a lot of people don't have those experiences. I did in law school study comparative law in Europe for a term. It was very fascinating to see that, where the US, our states have a ton of power. And I think people really don't understand how our country is structured. It's not taught very well in civics, if you get much civics education at all. But, in the EU, it's really changed over the past few years, and certainly over the past few decades. But particularly as everything started to meld together a little bit better and the euro was used more, now it's about 80-ish% of the law that is made in Europe is actually made at the EU level, and it's adopted by the countries. And our states, have the kind of the reverse of that. And 80 is kind of a thumb in the air number, but we actually don't have, we have a lot of federal law, but the things that impact our daily lives are generally governed by state law. So we almost operate like the EU, except our states have more power than their nations do. So it's an interesting inverse relationship there. That was probably the best thing that I took away from there. Other than I am better about remembering everything can be filmed than an awful lot of people that I went to school with over there. So I had that experience. I did some relief work in Haiti, which has just been going through some horrible things lately. So I've been down to Haiti quite a few times. I've visited 35 countries besides the US. I've been to every state but Alaska. Part of that is when I was a kid, we used to take road trips, and we would spend a good chunk of each year sort of just going, looking at other states. I've taken an awful lot of road trips myself. The only state I haven't been to is Alaska, and that's, my husband used to work there, and it actually was pretty close to where I grew up comparatively, but I have not been there yet. Maine was the 49th state I went to, and I just fell in love with it. And so that's sort of how I ended up here. I had been here, 20 years ago. 20, maybe over 20 years ago, on a trip, and really liked it. When I went to law school, and this is why I didn't hit quite 8 years as a parks commissioner, I was very entrenched in the community, and there was no way I was going to be able to do law school and run my business and be a city official and sit on all the commissions that I was sitting on and be on the board of directors of the Chamber of Commerce and be the homeowners association president. And there were too many ands. I couldn't do it all. So I had to really connect. It was sad. I used to really miss that community a lot, but I am more connected to Maine than I was ever to that community. And I thought that place felt like home, but gosh, Maine sure does. So when I was in law school, I actually started law school in Philadelphia. So I did my first year of law school in Philadelphia. And I got an MBA down there as well. So I did my 1L year. And then I went to Europe for that summer to study comparative law. Previously, my undergrad, I have an associate's from community college, from Cascadia Community College, which is why you hear me advocate all the time for community colleges. In Washington State, you actually don't have to have a high school diploma or GED to go to community college, and I'm pretty sure you do here. So I had to show them one of my degrees to let me take some classes at the community college. So I started at community college. I just looked up. The economy was changing. I knew that I was going to need some sort of education because my clients were getting slower to pay. So I got an associate's there. I transferred into the University of Washington. There was a direct transfer agreement where if you got a certain grade point, you were guaranteed a slot at University of Washington. The University of Washington system is pretty similar to the UMaine system in that if you went to college in Washington State, almost everybody went to UW. That doesn't mean there aren't other colleges there. It's just that everybody goes there because it's got relatively affordable tuition and good programs. And Maine is also like that. So I did my first year at Drexel in Philadelphia, went to Paris, lived in Paris and traveled around a little bit that summer, came back, got a master's degree in business. Then I had a job offer up here in Maine for the summer. I worked for Francis Jackson, who is just a lovely, lovely person. Jackson McNichol does Social Security disability law. While I was up here, my husband and I discovered that we were quite unexpectedly expecting our oldest son. And we just decided to stay. We loved it here. We used to come up here on weekends the couple years before. If there was a long weekend, we'd drive up because it felt like all of the good stuff about Washington State that we liked without any of the bad stuff. There's not a lot of traffic in Maine. It's very endearing. But it had all the stuff that we loved. It had same music vibe, the same kind of personality. Washington State doesn't have that vibe anymore. It's really become a very different place, but it feels a lot like what we grew up with, except better. And it's been great. We brought our oldest home to the same house we live in now. We are building a house in Sandy River Plantation. We were hoping to have already been out there by this summer. But we weren't. Construction delays and drama that's not very interesting. If anybody wants to know about it, I'm happy to give more detail, but it's funnier to look at from the outside than it is to live in. We chose not to rent out there while we were completing, even though our boys were disappointed to be doing school out here instead of out there. For a couple of reasons. One is that we didn't, I moved like 20 times in my life. I don't want to move a whole bunch more. I just want to be home. We didn't want to move our boys a bunch, but also we've had some housing issues in Maine. And if we were to rent a place out in Sandy River area, and it wouldn't be Sandy River, it would be Rangeley. There really aren't very much in the way of rentals in Sandy River. Very few people live there. It's a population around 200. We would be taking housing away from somebody who needs it more. We would be taking housing away from somebody who works at IGA or who works at Moose Alley. And I would not feel okay with that in this market. Ethically, it felt very icky. So we're working on getting out there, but that's sort of a summary of my background. There's so much more. Part of the problem I have is, I skipped over some jobs. Like, for example, when I worked at Kinko's, I also had other jobs because I used to work about 100 hours a week to make ends meet. So I worked at Kinko's, but at the same time, I also worked full-time filming microfiche. And then I had a part-time job on weekends, selling shoes. And so I've done a lot of things at the same time. I've owned a marketing firm. I've sold printing. I've done a range of stuff. I'm on probably my fourth self-employment business. I've been running a law firm since 2013. So before that, I owned a marketing firm. I was working on trying to start a hotel chain in the Caribbean, and that had been going so very well until there was that giant earthquake in Haiti, and then sort of took that plan out. So I've done a little bit of a bunch of things. I've done a little bit of economic development work. I did that with some of the project in Haiti. I also did that with the city of Woodinville. So I've done this really like fascinating, interesting to me. I realize it's probably not interesting to other people. This very fascinating and interesting set of things that makes me a very well-rounded person. And a lot of that is just, I have a lot of natural energy. So, if I wasn't working 3 jobs, I started getting very involved in extracurricular activities. And I started finding organizations that were interesting and meaningful to me. And I kept my life very, very full. I had a lot of, with my dad dying, I had a lot of emptiness in my childhood that I tried to keep very full. So I didn't have a whole lot of time to stop and be sad or stop and, worry. I don't enjoy worrying, and I'm sort of naturally a fairly cautious and worrying person. Somebody the other day made a comment that I seemed to recognize that there's a lot of unintended consequences of law, and the law should factor that in. And, my answer is partially yes, and partially also, I don't think the law should require everybody to live their life as I do. I have a lot of friends that have a much less conservative lifestyle than I have, but my lifestyle is fairly conservative. I'm frugal. I am married. I've been married to the same person in a closed marriage with 2 kids and a dog and a cat and a pretty tight budget. I'm not a very exciting person. So I've tried to have a lot of excitement that I brought into my life as far as, activities and travel and keeping my life very full. But a lot of time I don't talk about it because it makes me sound scattered, and I'm not scattered. I'm making sure that I'm always challenged. But I understand that not everybody has that life philosophy. So I also don't want to bore people with things that are interesting to me. A few more people come in. I'll talk for a couple minutes more. If you have any questions, you can drop them in the chat. We already had some very fast language dropped in the chat. So probably avoid calling names or step on legal language. This is the first day we've ever had that happen, which is pretty good considering how far along we are in the campaign. I'm happy to answer any questions that you will have. This is your town hall, not mine. Like I said, I'm happy to talk about me, but I recognize that though I think a lot of stuff about my life is interesting, it's probably not very interesting to anybody else. And I guess if I had a much more festive life, it would probably be a little bit easier to get press. But, doing science projects with my kids is probably not very interesting to anybody but us. Or, we had a lot of fun during the pandemic, exploring science stuff especially with our 9-year-old. Our 11-year-old is definitely up for it too, but our 9-year-old gets very intense on science. So whether it's that he wanted to have his own still so that he can make his own essential oils, or growing banana plants that are definitely tropical and not meant for Maine. We've had quite a run of it. We got silicone molds so the boys could make their own ice cube trays of shapes they wanted, or cakes. We had to cut that one a little short because our 9-year-old wanted to make butt cakes, and that just didn't seem like a great idea. But yeah, we have a lot of fun. We do a lot of interesting things in our house, but I feel like most of the stuff that we do is interesting to us and not interesting in kind of a global context. Kind of the joke used to be that I can be funny and interesting in small groups or to myself, but in large groups, I'm definitely not funny or interesting ever. So I have seen no other questions or comments, and we certainly had our share of festive earlier. If there's anything else you need, you can find me online. This upcoming Saturday, I think I'm going to be at a Hunter breakfast, so you may not have me. Oh, should members of Congress speak up about anti-Semitism? Of course. Members of Congress are supposed to be leaders. We should be speaking up anytime there is desperate treatment of groups. Now, it doesn't mean that that should be our full-time job, because if we spoke up every time somebody was a jerk, we literally would have nothing else to do. But yeah, when we see trends of people being unkind to groups, whether it's, I can't hear them either. So Chuck says he can't hear them speaking up. Yeah, they're not. Just like they're not speaking up with teachers getting harassed, just like they're not speaking up with a lot of the LGBTQ issues, just like they're not speaking up for women who are half of the population. And that, there are some that are, but the only group that's important is not just old white guys. I mean, they're not unimportant, but they're not the most important group. We're all important. And it seems like when you bring up an issue that's anything but something that always applies to them too, you're seen as having identity politics. And that's not true. You're saying, hey, if we're all equal, we've got a group that's less than equal, and we need to make sure that they get up to the same spot. And whether that's speaking up about anti-Semitism, which is shocking lately, or speaking up about genocide that's occurring in other places, particularly if we're playing a role, or speaking up about the way women are being treated, or that people who are LGBTQ are feeling threatened. Or even just talking about mental health in children and violence that, we have a generation now, a full generation, more than a generation of traumatized children that have grown into traumatized adults with a lot of the gun violence that we have. And I don't know how we got to this place where our Congress can't talk through difficult or challenging issues, but part of taking that job is being willing to say, hey, this stuff's not okay. And again, the anti-Semitism is not new, but it has definitely been resurging substantially in the past couple of weeks, thanks to a person who keeps getting a microphone, but I don't know why. And we also have some like petty billionaires that are fueling a lot of this, which isn't helping at all. And there's, being a billionaire apparently makes one very petty, and so that we should be able to vote on whether or not we send them to Mars. But they should be putting themselves. It's not a role where you put yourselves literally in a line of fire for people, but figuratively, you should be willing to put yourselves in a line of fire for people. I mean, one of the reasons I'm running against Golden is he says what he thinks gets him elected and makes him popular, but not what needs to be said. And if you're not willing to risk your job to do the job well, you shouldn't be doing that job. It's a big, important job. And whether it's standing in front of people saying, hey, anti-Semitism, never okay, or genocide, never okay. Or saying, why are we making people who have same-sex marriages get stressed out about their marriage? Why are women having to stress out about birth control? We shouldn't be. I know I am. I know I've seen a lot of news and thought, oh, great, I've got to have a new IUD soon. Am I not going to be able to even get that anymore? We shouldn't have to worry about that. The government should not be putting us in a position where groups that aren't 100% of people have to worry that they are suddenly a victim of everybody else. It's definitely not acceptable. And prior to the anti-Semitism, which is always there and it shouldn't be, but bubbling up particularly in the last couple of weeks, I've been deeply concerned that we have teachers that are being called groomers, teachers who are not paid well enough to take this kind of abuse. Not that anybody should be abused, but they are definitely not paid well enough to take this kind of abuse. Being called groomers, and leaders not being willing to step in and say, oh yeah, no, we don't do that. That's not acceptable. Doing normal sex ed classes doesn't make a teacher a groomer. Having books that talk about age appropriate subjects in a wide range does not make you a groomer. And I've watched so many of our politicians have their standard stance be like, well, those are school district decisions. And so you're going to have to shake it up with the school district. I mean, though it's true, those are school district decisions. We don't have rampant grooming in the schools. Every once in a while there will be somebody in any profession that acts inappropriately, but it's not the course curricula that we are grooming children into these behaviors. So and I think we're seeing it in a lot of professions. I think we're seeing it in a lot of not professions. I think we're seeing it in a lot of public spaces and private spaces. And it is very disappointing to me that we don't have leadership that steps up and says, hey, knock it off. You don't have to be a jerk. We're done with the jerk bit. We don't do that anymore. And quite to the contrary, we have leaders that seem to be embracing irresponsibility, that seem to be embracing hate as a mechanism, that seem to be embracing rewarding that behavior and rewarding tribalism, and it's awful. So I hope that we get to stop doing that soon. I would really like that a lot if we could stop doing that. I wish that we had a member of Congress in the 2nd Congressional District who found it appropriate, who found it at least as appropriate to stick his neck out on issues that were hot as he does to have a beer on issues that are popular. And that makes me very sad. So I hope that sort of long-winded answered your question, Chuck. But yes, you shouldn't be willing to do this job if you're not willing to be a buffer, because that's what this job is. I've been hit a lot that I say that we need a law that, protects our privacy and keeps, abortion shouldn't be a state issue. I've watched a lot of folks deflect and say it's a state issue. Your neighbors shouldn't get to vote whether or not you have basic human rights. And that includes your religion, that includes your medical choices, that includes who you choose to love, as long as everybody is consenting and has capacity. And I'm concerned that we're pushing some of these decisions that shouldn't be at the states to the states. Some issues most definitely belong in the states, and you do not want them regulated federally, because they will never get addressed, or they will be addressed in a way that it's just, you can't get to the people making those decisions. But basic human rights should never be something that your neighbors get to vote on whether or not you have. I think we all know that, I don't know, I wouldn't want all my neighbors voting on me having basic human rights. I don't know. I don't know that in large groups, especially as resources becomes more scarce as the years go on, we necessarily make wise decisions about that in groups where they are big enough to be faceless, but small enough that you get really bad tribal hate. So I hope that answered your question, Chuck. I haven't seen any other questions come in. I apologize to anybody who saw the disruptions earlier. They were festive. I will see you guys around. I will probably not have a town hall, or a breakfast with Tiffany this Saturday. I will try. I don't think it's going to happen. I am going to be done with the hunter's breakfast right around then. I just don't think I'm going to be able to catch a signal, and I may not even be conscious enough, because that hunter's breakfast starts really early. So town hall next week, breakfast with Tiffany the following Saturday. I'm probably might do a town hall on election day, and then we're done. Then after that, I get to have a Saturday where I don't have to set an alarm, and I'm so excited about that. And I guess we'll see how it goes. I'll either be starting to gear up and get an office ready for DC or not. If you are interested in helping out, please write some postcards, get in my messages, and I'll send you some addresses. If there's anything else I can do for you in the meantime, if you'd like to help out the campaign, let me know. And I will see you guys next Tuesday. Have a good one.